All right, Internet's back at it with another Sultans and Sneakers podcast. This is your host, Mahin the Podcaster, and I'm here with Chaplain, Gareth Bryant. Chaplain, amongst other things. You've got a lot of different hats you're wearing, Gareth. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're out in New York, right?
Yeah, I'm in NYC. Yeah.
Okay. What neighborhood are you from?
I'm from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn.
Is that where was that movie Do the Right Thing? Is that the location of that? Okay.
Yeah.
That's when people say Bed-Stuy, I remember that comes to mind. Starting off the conversation, I was watching one of your videos on YouTube, and you were talking about how you were interested in religion as a teenager. You had to make some interesting decisions at an age when a lot of us aren't really thinking about something that deep. When I was 15 years old, I remember what was on my mind was like, what am I going to get on my SAT? And I remember this like thinking that my dad made it seem like, and his friends made it seem like, that if I didn't get myself right in high school, my entire life was going to be screwed up. Right. I found out later, 23 or 38 right now, that's not exactly true. But, tell me a little bit about your growing up, your family background, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm Afro-American. What's interesting about my family is that later in life, I ended up doing some research because my family is originally from New Bern, North Carolina. That's in Craven County, North Carolina. I ended up finding out that the slavery narrative is really not the reality as it's played out. I'll give an example. I ended up finding out through the research of someone by the name of Paul Hoenig. He has a PhD in Afro-American history, Afro-American genealogy. And through his research, I was able to find out that within 5 states, which were prior to the American Revolution, 5 colonies, Virginia, North and South Carolina, Delaware, Maryland, in which Delaware was carved out of the colony of Pennsylvania. But within what ended up being these 5 states, historically, before the American Revolution, there were at least 1,000 Afro-American families who were free people prior to the American Revolution. My family is one of those families, and I found that out through the research of Paul Hoenig. So when people talk about Afro-American history, this is one significant chunk of Afro-American history that is very constantly either glossed over, overlooked, or just not mentioned at all.
So are you saying your family was never enslaved?
Based on the research that I was able to gather, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, if anyone remembers like history class, there's Crispus Attucks, who was martyred at the Boston Tea Party, was it?
The Boston Massacre.
The Boston Massacre, right. And he was a free black man, if I understand.
In Boston, yeah.
In Boston,
yeah.
Okay. But now what you're saying is that there is basically what's been glossed over is that you have these communities of Africans in the South, in the slavery South, who were free from the
prior to the American Revolution. Yeah. There's actually historical narratives that depict, even in terms of people coming from Africa to the New World, every African that came on a ship wasn't a slave ship.
Okay.
So there's even ever evolving research pertaining to that.
Okay. So
because I tell people all the time, not just in terms of Afro-American history, but just history in general, is that I tell people all the time, the most important history lesson I ever learned in my life is that historians are the best liars.
Or the victors go the history. They shape.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. The winners always tell the vast bulk of history. Losers very often don't get a chance to author their own histories.
Okay.
For example, I ended up finding out fairly recently, after the American Civil War, there were almost 500,000 ex-Confederates and their families that relocated from the United States to Brazil. And they were allowed to settle as American expats into Brazil. And they formulated this pro-Confederate culture that has even survived to the present day. Even in Brazil, every year they have this annual celebration of the Confederate States of America. And in Brazil, in Portuguese, they call them the Confederados.
Okay.
Like, you can look this up. Like, if you Google Confederate Festival Brazil,
Yep.
all the information about it pops up.
Okay. Now let me ask you this: were those, because I've read when I was in college, I remember reading certain things about like blacks who fought for the Confederate Army, even maybe.
Yeah, that's a fact. I mean, there's even Native Americans who fought for the Confederacy.
Okay. And so the mix of folks who went down to Brazil, was it a mix of black, whites, Native Americans?
From what I know,
okay.
From what I know, Allah knows best. From what I know, based on the research, it seems that all of those people who relocated were pretty much Anglo-Americans or Euro-Americans.
Okay.
It seems that way. Allah knows best. It seems that way.
Now, when you're going back and talking about, you mentioned the pre-American Revolution, that their status ever changed, or they remained free throughout the period of slavery?
Based on my research, they remained free.
Okay. And what was I guess, but I assume there was always some kind of second-class citizen status.
Oh yeah, definitely.
For sure,
definitely.
right.
And especially depending on where you moved and where you were in the South.
Okay.
Definitely. Like, freedom, like actual, like, official freedom didn't mean that you weren't hated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I'm saying? So even though you had the status of freedom, they still treated you as though you was a nigger.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
In that time period, it was almost like free didn't mean freedom. You know what I'm saying? Like, back then, especially depending on where you were, there was a difference between being free and having freedom, if that makes sense.
Sure. Now, when did your family migrate from North Carolina to up the East Coast?
Right. That started with my grandfather. My grandfather, he actually, his mother actually left my great-grandfather, and she relocated with his elder brother and elder sister from New Bern, North Carolina to New York City.
Okay.
So I'm actually a second-generation New Yorker. My father was a first-generation New Yorker because my father was born in New York City. I was born in New York City. But my grandfather wasn't born in New York City. It's just that he lived most of his life in New York City. So he came to New York City. His mother brought him to New York City from New Bern, North Carolina when he was 8. And he was in New York City ever since.
Okay. Now, when you're growing up, is this something that you understood about your family background as a young child?
I had no idea. This wasn't until years after I became Muslim and did my own independent research about my family history.
So even your dad and grandparents weren't aware of some of this stuff? Or
Allah knows best, they probably weren't.
Okay, I got you. Now, what kind of religious background did you grow up in?
Because also you have to remember something.
Sorry.
Just because you had a intergenerational freedom, people still bought into the slavery narrative out of like intimidation or manipulation of the school system, all that other type of stuff.
Okay. So I was gonna ask, like, what kind of religious background did you grow up in?
I grew up in a typical Judeo-Christian environment, which is very common for almost every Muslim revert native to the Western Hemisphere.
Okay. And would you say your family was pretty religious?
Depending on the individual. I can say from my household, my mom specifically, she was very religio observant, and she still is.
Okay. Because you talk about in your story about how the thing about were you Baptist by denomination, or what kind of denomination were you?
No, the denomination my father's side of the family were Baptists. They were like Southern Baptists.
Okay.
My mother's side of the family was a mixture of Pentecostal, Apostolic, Jehovah's Witness. But my mother personally was Pentecostal.
Okay. I'm a little bit familiar with them. I've gotten to know some of their guys fairly recently, but you mentioned that. I mean,
all of the Western Hemispheric branches of Christianity basically stem from either Catholicism or Protestantism.
Right.
Like in the United States specifically, all of the the side branches, like when it comes to people like the Amish or the Mennonites and all of those different branches, they stem from Protestantism. Right,
for sure. Now, you had mentioned that one of the issues you seem to have was this idea of the divinity of Jesus Christ. Right? Why? I guess I want to understand why you felt that to be problematic.
Well, much like I mentioned in the video, it didn't compute to me intellectually. It was never
Okay.
something that registered up here. And because it didn't register up here, it never embedded itself in here. So because I wasn't able to accept it intellectually, it was impossible for me to believe it psycho-emotionally.
Now
Because as we know,
yeah,
Islamically, we know that al-iman, faith,
yeah,
is an emotion by definition, because
right.
it core is in the heart.
Sure, but as a Christian, you can make the argument that, well, the fact that you can't understand it is a sign of God's nature. Like, you know, it's the finite cannot understand the infinite. You feel what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, obviously, we know Islamically. I mean, in hindsight, as
Yeah.
being Muslim, we know that that's a form of adhulm, oppression. So Allah would never give you information about Him that's not humanly intelligible.
Sure. Right. Okay. I mean, look, but that didn't cross your mind. It's like when you were like, I assume before you converted to Islam, you probably did you ever ask a pastor, like, how do you explain this?
Yeah, I was actually the most hated in my Bible study classes.
I remember
would
that.
always
Yeah.
ask those type of questions.
And the response would be like, what? You just gotta have faith.
Unintelligible answers. Yeah, unintelligent answers.
Like we can address,
and
you know. So
yeah, there was a lot of deflection. There was a lot
okay.
of deflection, and that deflection, you know, what's interesting is that the reasons how and why I left Judeo-Christianity are not the same reasons how and why I became Muslim.
Okay.
They were separate reasons.
Right. So like, you know, these days, I don't know if like most Christians are Trinitarian by nature, right?
Almost exclusively.
Yeah, you know, there's a few. I actually came across some Unitarian Christians. So they believe that Jesus is created, but he's the Son of God, but he's not like God himself. It's almost like if God is the owner of the universe, Jesus is like the CEO. Like there's a hierarchy there, right?
Basically. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But it's still a conflict of interest, because it's like people who are Unitarian, they believe in the concept of the Holy Spirit, but they don't believe that that's part of the their like kind of like divine hierarchy, or like their pantheon. Because typically in Christianity, there's like a three-pronged pantheon, what they call, quote unquote, the Father, quote unquote, the Son, quote unquote, the Holy Spirit. So that's like their three-pronged, like trilateral or triangular pantheon.
The Trinity.
Right. So right. Exactly. So with Unitarian Christians, they have kind of like a bilateral. It's kind of like a bilateral pantheon.
Okay.
And they exclude like the classic like Holy Spirit. They believe in the Holy Spirit, but they don't include that in their theological pantheon, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. But don't you think it seems to me that it makes more sense? Because I've read like a good chunk of the New Testament, like the Gospels, in some of Paul's letters, etc., the book of Revelation. To me, it seems like the Unitarian view is more biblical. It can be reconciled at least, right?
It's more textually, it's more, even though it's corrupted and tainted, it's more textually accurate than the Trinity.
Yeah, right. And the Catholics I found interesting. I interviewed a Catholic professor at UNC Chapel Hill a few weeks back, and he, you know, to me, Catholicism, if you're going to be a Trinitarian, to me, you might as well be Catholic. I don't see how you can.
Basically, right.
Because
it pretty much doesn't make sense to be a Trinitarian Christian and be non-Catholic.
Right, exactly. Because to them, because the argument I would always make to my Protestant Trinitarian friends is like, because they talk about being biblical, all this stuff, and I'm like, yo, bro, but you decided how God's nature was in these ecumenical councils like 300 years after the fact.
Like the most famous one that was chaired by Constantine I, the Council of Nicaea.
Right. So
and that council solidified the theological standard for Christianity prior to the advent of like the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and Protestantism and all of that type of stuff.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, and so I think the Catholics believe that the church tradition is a pillar of faith, That's why they can, it's like the Protestants seem to cherry pick it. They like cherry picked on it for a while, and then they broke off, and now they're like, so to me, it doesn't
originally,
yeah.
When Protestantism first formulated, theologically, there was no difference between the average Protestant and the average Catholic.
Okay.
The difference is that the Protestants had excommunicated themselves from the papacy because of papal corruption.
Right.
And that's what the whole 95 treaties by Martin Luther, in which he nailed them to the door of Pope Gregory I think Gregory the Fifth or Gregory the Eighth or something like that.
Okay. So now you decided
so it's
that
like the theology of Protestants is starting to become more like watered down, for lack of a better term, and modified over centuries. But when it initially happened, theologically, there was literally no difference between Protestants and Catholics. Both Protestants and Catholics, respectively, were basically, prior to the reign of Henry VIII.
Yeah.
Protestants and Catholics were both 100% equilaterally Trinitarian Christians.
I gotcha. Can you speak a little bit about the East? With the Eastern Orthodox Church at all?
One of the major differences between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church is that the Eastern Orthodox Church, they have their own pope.
Okay.
Because there was actually a time in the history of the papacy where there were three separate papacies. There were three separate popes.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, that ended up ending, and then the reunification of the papacy happened. But by the time that happened, like, the Eastern Orthodox Church had already carved out its niche, which is like the dominant Christianity that we see in like Eastern Europe, like the former Soviet Iron Curtain bloc, modern day Russia, which was the former Soviet Union. And then there's also a branch of that Eastern Orthodox Church where you have like the Oxums, the Coptics, the Egyptian Christians, the Ethiopian Christians. All of them are like in that kind of like Coptic block. So Copticism is basically the African version of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And if I'm not mistaken, they have their own pope.
I got you. So going back to your story,
if I'm not mistaken, the Coptic pope, his seat of office, if I'm not mistaken, is in Palestine, modern day Israel, if I'm not mistaken.
So now going back to your story here, once you decided you weren't going to believe in Christianity anymore, did you still believe in God or higher power?
Yeah, I was never an atheist.
And then how did you come across Islam?
Well, I officially stopped referring to myself as Christian when I was 13. Like junior high school, right? And, well, I mean, 13 on the Islamic calendar and 12 on the Gregorian calendar. So from the time I entered junior high school until the time I came to high school, there was this 2-year period of like religio-spiritual limbo. It's like utter confusion. I'm trying to sift things out with the very little information that I had at the time. But then, as Allah would have it, via the mercy of Allah, when I get to high school, we were commissioned to, in high school, our global studies class, we were commissioned to make a history report about 3 religions that we knew little to nothing about. And I actually mentioned this word for word in the video that you saw.
Yep.
So I had chosen, at that time, the 3 religions that I knew little to nothing about. I chose Hinduism, I chose Judaism, I chose Al-Islam. And I immediately gravitated towards Al-Islam because from dead on, off the muscle, off the rip, I saw the uniqueness of Al-Islam from any other religion that I had ever heard about or ever read about. And I actually have some books that I still have in the crib that they belong to my father. I ended up inheriting them after he died, obviously. But they were books about like world religions, right? So I was reading these books very heavily, very intensely. And there was always like these like shirk triggers, like these association triggers of like idolatry, paganism, and stuff like that. So every religion I read about, there were like these shirk red flags that popped up. And when those things popped up, I'm like, oh, scratch that off the bucket list. Scratch this off the bucket list. That's not it. This is not it. But when I started reading about al-Islam, I had to pull the emergency brake, because there was nothing about what I've read concerning al-Islam that was shirk driven.
So you knew off the bat that paganism, idolatry couldn't have been true. That's you had that understanding. Okay.
Right, because I was constantly using Judeo-Christianity as my litmus. Basically, what I was saying to myself is that anything that even remotely resembles Judeo-Christianity, I'm not fucking with it. That's literally what I had in my mind.
Do you actually believe? So, do you think it's polemical to say that Trinitarianism is paganism? Or is that a fair argument? Because they would say, because we're having this.
I mean, it's definitely a shirk, right?
Right.
Without a doubt, it's a shirk, it's association. Right. Now, depending on who you ask, even depending amongst Muslims, depending on who you ask, right? They might consider it paganism. They may not consider it paganism.
Right.
But that's just like apples and oranges. But what I will say is that when it comes to the different strands of Judeo-Christianity, without a doubt, Catholicism is literally, Catholics are literally like the Hindus of Christians. And the reason how and why I say that is because in terms of like the whole concept of saintism, in terms of how they literally make dua, they literally make prayer to different types of saints, and they believe different types of saints have these type of esoteric powers of deliverance and safety and security, and they have a saint for damn near every day of the Gregorian calendar.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like for example, they have the saint called quote unquote Saint Christopher, right? In Catholicism, quote unquote Saint Christopher is the guardian of travelers. And people like Catholics, they literally make offerings and sacrifice, and they make penance to this Saint Christopher.
Right.
Or like Saint Jude, right? Saint Jude is like basically like the guardian or the patron or the saint of like misfits and degenerate people, stuff. That's why they named the hospital St. Jude's Hospital, pertaining to people who are in very destitute people who are afflicted with very serious and destitute health conditions.
Okay.
That's why that hospital is called St. Jude's Hospital, because it's a specialty hospital that focuses on things like cancer or very serious illnesses or very aggressive illnesses or terminal illnesses, things like that.
Sure.
Because in Catholicism, St. Jude, quote unquote, St. Jude is the patron saint, quote unquote, of people who are downtrodden or people who are misfits, if you will, for lack of a better term.
I got you. Okay. Now, Islam, it seems like it passed the test more or less, right? So was it automatic, like, or do you need to do some more homework still?
No, I didn't come to that point yet.
Okay.
Again, as Allah would have it, ironically, one of my math teachers, who's not even Muslim, may Allah guide him, he's still alive.
I mean,
he had noticed that I had a particular interest in al-Islam. So what he did for me, and the irony is that I grew up around a lot of Muslims. In fact, ironically, most of the Muslims that I knew growing up were Bengali. They were either Bengali or Yemeni. And I knew Muslims from different parts of the world, Muslim Afro-Americans, Muslim Afro-Caribbean people, Muslim Caribbean people, whatever. But I knew a lot of Muslims, but I knew little to nothing about al-Islam prior to becoming Muslim. So my math teacher, he literally purchased for me an English translation of the Quran. And so I started reading it. And the English translation of the Quran was literally the first religious book that I had ever read cover to cover. Like reading the English translation of the Quran was literally the first time that I had ever read a religious book from cover to cover. He bought that translation for me in October. I was Muslim by December.
You know, there's this concept that you hear people talking about that, like, because I've heard this story so many times.
It's a very common story. It's a very common threaded story among Muslim reverts. Like my revert story is not unique at all.
Right, exactly.
It's very typical of any run-of-the-mill Muslim revert, especially those of us who are native to the Western Hemisphere.
Sure.
My story is a very common revert story. It's very commonplace.
There's a recent thought that I've seen amongst, and this isn't amongst people who converted to Islam either, so this may be something that you can take with a grain of salt, but there's idea that, we shouldn't give the Quran first to people, to non-Muslims, because if dawah, because they won't understand it, because it's so confusing, because they're used to, like, the Bible is very chronological, right? And then the Quran is kind of like all over the place. What would
actually, that's false also. There is a specific order and purpose and things like that.
Okay.
So in other words, those things are not missing from the Quran.
Mm-hmm. So you yourself, I mean, by your own testimony, is that the Quran is and testimony of many others, that like this idea that we should give, like, for example, if someone, you always hear this idea that, okay, if you're dealing with African American brother and he's not Muslim, give him the autobiography of Malcolm X. If there's like books for like European American Muslim, European descent, like Martin Lings's Sirah.
Allah knows best. If I would have never read an English translation of the Quran, Allah knows best, I probably would have never became Muslim. Allah knows best.
Right. I think people are underestimating even it's a translation. It's not we know by definition that's not the Quran. It's a translation of the Quran.
Right, it's a translation, but that doesn't. It's still irrelevant, because through Allah's mercy, Allah can guide someone through any venue that He wishes.
Right.
And Allah does that at will all the time.
Right. So, but it's still like the translation of the speech of God, literally. You know what I'm saying? So that's going to have a certain effect. As long
by definition, it would have to, and it still has some type of fa'idah. It still has some type of benefit. Right.
There's on the Mad Mamluks podcast, which I'm a co-host of, which you may be familiar with. We did an episode with a guy named Sheikh Imam Daniel Hernandez.
I know him personally. He's from Jersey.
Yeah, right. So his Quran story for convert is the most mind-blowing story like I've ever heard in my life. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would encourage you to like check that episode. I'll send you the link offline. But like, he talks about it briefly. But like, I've heard it in other. I heard he talked about it occasionally. But the way he told the story about how this Quran was like he never was hanging out with any Muslims. It was a Quran he stole from a library, right? And he was like, it became his companion, his best friend, as he calls it, right? And it literally transformed his life.
No, that's really ironic. He stole a translation of the Quran, and the guidance of Al-Islam stole his heart.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So So tell me about. I know when as I was like kind of doing my homework on you, as a lot of people do when they come when they become religious. We go through a phase of like.
I personally don't use the term religious.
Okay.
It's a very like elitist term.
Okay.
And I'm very anti-elitism. So the term religious versus irreligious, I really try my best to never classify anyone, including myself, with the term quote unquote religious, because Muslims especially, we use that term to religio oppress other people who we deem as less than.
Or like practicing versus non-practicing. Would you equate that
similar? So I don't use those terms. Like a term that I would use for myself is religio observant. Okay. I'll call myself religio observant, but I never classify myself as quote unquote religious. That's just a term that really rubs me the wrong way.
I can appreciate that. I think in the past sometimes I would say that like when I became conscious of my obligation to God. In a way, there's because like I was born in a Muslim family, but I didn't read the Quran until I read the Quran when I was 19. Nothing really sunk in. You know what I'm saying? Right. But I guess when we first entered this phase of religious observance, a lot of us tend to have this like phase of being like zealots. We're like kind of crazy, right? Right. I know you alluded to that a little bit, where you just were a little harsh with people? Like, tell me a little bit about that, and maybe we can get into the chaplaincy as a segue once you share a little bit about that.
Right. Well, keeping in line with like when I started reading the Quran.
Yeah.
Is I was literally looking for, I mean, like, obviously this was arrogant of me, but I was trying to look for flaws and faults while I was reading. And when I realized that I couldn't find any, not even in a translation, because remember, I had no knowledge of the Arabic language at the time. The only thing that I knew about the Arabic language was that it was another language, right? So when I'm realizing that there's no type of flaw or fault that I could find in what I'm reading, that's what solidified everything for me. I'm like, okay, this is it. This is the wave I need to be on.
Okay.
And I've been Muslim ever since.
Yeah.
Now, when I first became Muslim, right? I became Muslim in high school, right? So you remember what high school was like, right? Especially relative to the era that we grew up in. The golden age of rap music, the golden age of gang violence.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
What year did you graduate high school?
I graduated in 2000. I started high school in 96. We're the same age. I'm 38.
Yeah. So I graduated 99. I was class 99. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wait, so you turned 39 this year?
I'll turn 30. I'll be 39 in a couple weeks.
Okay, mashallah. All right, cool.
Yeah, I'll be 39 in a couple weeks.
So, I mean, but still, it's still the same era.
We're the same generation. Exactly, right.
Exactly. So by virtue of us being in that generation where you had like our culture, right? Just like youth culture, pop culture, rap culture, gang culture, it was like at the apex when we were on the scene, right? Party culture, dance culture, all that type of stuff was at its height, at its peak. So I become Muslim and I'm just literally immersed in this living my best lie environment. And I immediately stay with the crowd, right? Because I feel like I don't want to miss out on the fun. I don't want to be a social outcast. It's like, it's bad enough I became Muslim, you know what I'm saying? And that's weird and foreign to people. And like literally every day, I have to make sure that I'm on my P's and Q's to answer questions that people have. And it's like literally every day for me was like a dawah session. Like every day for me, I was telling people what I knew about al-Islam. So, and that's what encouraged me to learn so much so fast.
Even in Brooklyn?
I constantly had to answer questions from people.
I would assume in a place like New York City or Brooklyn that people would have some familiarity with Islam, even if they weren't Muslim.
You'd be surprised how many people didn't. Because remember, I became Muslim pre 9/11.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So in hindsight, it wasn't until after 9/11 happened that I realized that there's so many people who didn't know a damn thing about al-Islam at all. Forget what they think or feel that they knew.
Right.
They literally didn't know anything prior to 9/11.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I could see, because I remember, there's you were at that age, you were probably still more advanced than I was, because 15 you would have became Muslim in like what, sophomore year of high school, right?
No, I was still a freshman. I became
You're still
Muslim
freshman. Okay.
In December.
Okay. December of 96.
Yeah, December 96.
Okay. So like, yeah, I mean, people would ask me, my last name is Islam. And like people would ask me like, hey, it would be funny if you weren't Muslim and your last name was Islam. And, it would be things like that, but real casual. All they knew about, you got a kid in class. I remember there's one kid in like sophomore year biology. He's like, hey man, I heard you guys can get like 4 wives.
That's always, yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I was like, I thought I heard about it. Yeah, I thought I heard about it. I was like, yeah, I think so. I think that's right. I didn't know anything, dude. Like nothing. So because I went to Sunday school. Like Sunday school is a joke. You grew up like you might as well just be. You're better off just staying home. Because
honestly, especially back in the days when we was coming up. It's a little different now. Yeah, but especially back when we were coming up. Yeah,
right. Because it's almost like I remember. Yeah, I mean, it was. I think it was just the way your parents felt like, oh, well, we're doing something. In reality, looking back,
it was really nothing.
There was really nothing. And I'm still surprised that many of my friends from my generation or kids that I went to like Sunday school with, like either apostated or just completely have lost their Islamic identity,
Yeah.
right?
Like, honestly, Allah's my witness. I know so many people personally
Yeah.
who they're either Afro-American or Bengali or
Yeah.
African or whatever.
Yeah.
They were Muslim born. They're
Yeah.
literally not Muslim today.
Yeah.
And the failure of community based on things that you just mentioned,
right.
They're literally some of the many countless human reasons as per how and why these people are not Muslim anymore.
Yeah, I mean, on the immigrant side, it's simply just, I think, a failure to realize that, like, I don't know how far back, how many generations my family is Muslim. My maternal grandfather's last name is Mazumdar, which is, I think it's a Hindu name. It's amongst, like, you find it amongst, like, the Bengalis in Calcutta in Eastern India, which is primarily Hindu, right? I don't know. I never really, I don't know how many, I can't imagine it was, I can't say it's like several hundred years though. I would have to assume, who knows? But like there's an assumption that you grew up in a Muslim country that's 90% Muslim. And what you realize though, as I go back, and I go back to Bangladesh because most of my extended family is still there. And I go back every maybe 2 to 3 years.
Right.
And there's this like impression, people just stay Muslim because it's just culturally convenient.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, what's ironic is that from what I know, atheism is literally on the rise in places like Bangladesh.
Yeah, you're seeing it. It's still, there's still a stigma around it, I would say. But like the idea of the culture is still so Islamic. Like, then like it was funny because I was in Morocco back in February, before Corona hit. And we were in, I don't know, have you ever been to like the Middle East?
Yeah, I've been to Egypt and I've been to Saudi. Yeah.
Okay. So in Morocco, in Saudi, it's like you hear the adhan and stuff. You go for Hajj or Umrah, right? You're normally staying by the masjid. But in Morocco, I don't know how it's Egypt, but in Morocco, in Fez, we were in the inner city, right? And there's something about being in the inner city where you don't hear the adhan blasting. I don't know if it's because of the way the walls are structured, because it's like the old city where you have the gates and stuff, right?
Gotcha.
And you have like and I think you have, I don't know how many musallas there are, but you got the main Karawain Masjid, right? Which is about maybe a 15-20 minute walk from where we were staying. Yeah. But in Bangladesh, the adhan is blasting like all 5, and it's like multiple. I love it, but it's like you have this culture there. So I think there's an assumption that like people don't realize, and they're like, oh, well, why would they not be Muslim? I was like, because you're an American now, you got options, right? Like people are like, oh, you could do something else, right? And
to be honest with you, a lot of people, they leave Muslim or Muslim majority countries literally for that reason.
Yeah, so some do. I would say my parents came, my dad, and many of his colleagues, many of his friends, they came for economic gain. I think my dad came on some like fellowship for grad school, right? Back in the
like
mid-80s.
A courtesy visa or something like that, or like a work visa, stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So we just ended up staying. I think he had an intent at some point going back, but then you get here,
that's the usual Muslim foreigner, Muslim immigrant story.
Yeah.
That is very typical. Mm-hmm. See, a lot of Muslims from Muslim or Muslim majority countries, one of the human reasons how and why they lose so many of their children, even if they don't leave al-Islam, but if they just lose them and they end up belonging to the streets in more ways than one, is because they don't plant religio-social roots for them here or places outside of their countries. Because like you said, psycho-emotionally, they're still back home.
Yeah.
So they don't think to invest where they are. They think, okay, get the bag, buy some property, build a house back home, retire, die.
Yeah.
But that ends up not happening for so many people.
Yeah. I would say like very few that I know that actually went back, because
probably less than 10%.
I think they just realized. Yeah, I think I remember as a kid, man, my dad would always talk about, oh, we're gonna go back next year, and push comes to shove, it never happened.
20 next years went by.
Right. But it's just like, when but the idea, but also like the level of Islam that is taught in like a lot of Muslim countries is very basic. I mean, I don't know how it is in the Middle East, but in a Bangladesh, for
The Middle
instance,
East is not that different.
you know,
It's not that different.
yeah,
It's infantile at best
mm-hmm,
and insulting at worst.
okay, yeah. I mean,
Because like you said, it's the assumption that because this is a Muslim majority country, that people are actually have rudiment knowledge about Islam, and that's furthest from the truth.
yeah. I would say that I remember because when I became really practicing, I was like deep in the Salafi dawah.
Yeah.
And I remember when we had these like Saudi students or Emirat, like maybe Saudi students coming from like Saudi.
The Khalid, yeah, from the
yeah,
Khalid,
the Khalid,
yeah.
you know, coming in. And
Yeah.
we at our masjid, which is a Salafi joint, whenever these Saudi brothers would show up, we would be like, we'd literally worshiping them. We'd be like, oh, mashallah, you know about Sheikh Fulan and Sheikh Fulan. And they were like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
and they're asking us about like where they can go meet girls.
Literally.
Right? And we're like, what?
Yeah.
You know, because like you're always thinking like, mashallah, you're from the land of Tawheed, you know, and they're like,
all of that is a
we here to
farce.
party. Yeah, we here to party.
It was a Saudi girl that I knew, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, her and I are not cool anymore because she ended up being a bird. But anyway, at the time that we were cool,
yeah,
she told me that she grew up 3 blocks away from the Haram and never made Hajj.
Stuff.
How the hell did you grow up 3 blocks away from the Haram and never made Hajj?
That's insane.
Like, dude.
Yeah.
Like that shit is crazy. And then she had the nerve to claim to be from Ahlul Bayt. Like, nigga, what the hell is the point of being from Ahlul Bayt, assuming that you're actually telling the truth?
Right.
But let's assume that you're telling the truth. What the hell is the point of being from Ahlul Bayt if you've never made Hajj and you live in Al-Mecca 3 blocks away from the Haram?
Was she like bragging about it? Like, oh, I never went. It was like
literally.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a sad state of affairs, but yeah,
like, dude, I mean, I've been to her crib before.
Yeah.
I literally prayed more in her crib than she did.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Crazy, bro.
There
like
was
that sense of entitlement is like sickening. Like, you'll even hear Muslims, and obviously we know that this is not true because even the jinn had al-Islam before the creation of Adam, peace be upon him. But you have Muslims who literally co-sign that pseudo-narrative that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the founder of al-Islam. And theologically, that's 100% false.
Right. It reminds me of you seen that show Rami?
I saw commercials and clips of it, and I'm like nauseated. I'm like disgusted.
So, anyways, I'll tell you. There's a scene in season 2, where he's got to go to this Khaliji sheikh to get some money for his sheikh's masjid.
Right.
Khaliji, you know, and this rich dude, I think he went up somewhere in New York, rolls up in his mansion, right? And this dude has a guy that he pays to pray for him. Right?
Yeah, people really do that type of goofy
and then
shit.
I found out later
really
that actually happens.
That is not just for like art's sake.
Yeah.
People really do that type of shit.
So I was like, because when I first saw it, I was like, this is kind of a joke. But then like I was talking to some guys who like worked and like, you know, I was talking to somebody, it came up actually on a podcast we did on the other channel about like some you know, they would like you could be like they would hire you to lead your own. They're so lazy to go to Jummah, they'd pay you to come do Jummah in their apartment. Or something.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And like, especially like the ones that, because the average Saudi that comes to the US or the average Khaliji that comes to a place like the US, their families are loaded.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So money is nothing to them.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like they blow money like how we waste money like how we waste water.
Yeah.
Without even thinking about it twice.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. So getting back to your story, did you mentioned a little bit about how you were a little when you first came into I guess, being observant. You go through high school, right? And
Yeah.
you're struggling with this idea of like, because high school, man, we're young, we want to have fun, hormones are raging, and then
you got so many attractions and distractions pulling you. Yeah,
right.
It was very, very tumultuous time for obvious reasons. Yeah.
Okay, and then did you figure out a point in time, but it was where you kind of got yourself maybe
Basically,
like straightened
after
out?
I left high school, after
Yeah.
I graduated high school, I made a concerted effort to be more religio observant.
Okay.
So what did my dumb ass do? I dived headfirst into Salafism.
Okay. Well, hey, East Coast, that's what it's it's available.
No, that's just what the wave was. That's just what it was. Because like when I became Muslim, Salafism was at its height.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
And then like literally like right after 9/11, it started to experience a very sharp decline.
Yeah. I became more observant after 9/11, but
right,
like anything. But I think Salaf again. When I went to college, I went to Ohio State for my undergrad, and the MSA there consisted of was influenced heavily by brothers who were from the Middle East.
Right,
would come from like Jordan, Iraq, Saudi.
Right.
They brought there was a brother who like supplied all the books, like from the King Fahd printing complex.
Yeah.
So there was an inkling of that kind of stuff. There was always like Columbus was
the whole Dar es Salaam connect. Yeah.
Yeah. Columbus as a city is a small city compared to New York, obviously, right?
Right.
I mean, every city is small compared to New York, but Columbus.
All of the three C cities in Ohio are relatively small. Like Columbus, right. Cincinnati, Cleveland. Right. All of those cities are relatively small.
Yeah. So Columbus is always a city that's like Salafi Ikhwan, if you want to say, right? So you have people who are like, there was very little, you'd never see like Tabligh Jama'ah. You didn't know a lot about Sufis. I remember,
probably no Shi'is over there.
I mean, I knew one uncle who used to like, he was our teacher. He was a Shia brother. But he wasn't like, we didn't know what that meant. He wasn't blatant about it.
He wasn't repping it. He wasn't repping it, right?
Yeah,
right,
it's something we found out years later, right? But he was like a mainstay teacher at our school. I remember him like my buddy was always cracking jokes and like making like real lewd comments. And one time he had to like grab him by the ear and like pull him out. But we found out years later that he was the uncle was Shia, but he always was like he was able to like assimilate within our greater Sunni community without any issues, right? There was never.
And that's literally the concept of taqiyya.
Yeah,
like masking. Yeah.
Right. So so Columbus is that kind of town. I remember when I was in high school, my dad was I would say my parents were always more religious, more inclined than maybe some of their friends. So they would say stuff. They would always talk about like, my dad would be like, we need to start eating halal meat. And I was like, why? Like, it's already hard enough. Because I remember, if
that's hilarious.
I'll tell you a story. I don't know if you know the name Rumana Ahmed. She was on Obama's staff.
I think that name sounds fairly familiar.
Okay. So Rumana's dad and my dad were like college buddies back in Bangladesh. Right?
Oh, wow.
So we're all family friends. So, and Rahimahullah, her dad passed away like in the early 90s in a car accident. But they used to visit us like probably every other year. They still live in they live out in the DC area. So they come to Columbus or we do road trips together and stuff. This is like my dad's homie from college. Right. So we noticed we took a road trip down to like Kentucky, I think it was. And
I've been to Kentucky. Kentucky is actually the most beautiful state I've ever been to.
It's been, I haven't been there since 1992. That was the last. No, I'm sorry. I went there for Muhammad Ali's janazah.
Okay.
But like, you just go into Louisville and we didn't see. But yeah, my wife always talks about going to Kentucky. There's like random waterfalls and parks and stuff there.
It's beautiful. They have really beautiful campsites and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. So like, I remember we go to McDonald's and they'd all be ordering fish fillet. and this is like
That's the
early 90s.
typical.
What?
That's the when you're Muslim.
Yeah.
And you're doing a road trip and you stop by a McDonald's at a pit stop.
Yeah.
That is like the staple.
Yeah.
Every Muslim will order Chick-fil-A, fish fillet.
Filet of fish, right? And we would order like I would eat quarter pounder. And they never said nothing, but then like my dad, after they left, they go back to Virginia. My dad would be like, "Yeah, we need to start eating halal." Like I probably his buddy told him like, "Yeah, wait, what are you guys eating this stuff for?" Right?
Right.
And then like we never got around to it, you know. So yeah, he always had this inclination to want, and there was always the community in Columbus was always, and he rolled with like brothers who were like religiously inclined as well in that sense. They, you know, they would come by my house, even if they weren't Bengali. I remember there's a brother named Brother Yahya. He converted to Islam in the 80s. He's an old country boy from like outside Central Ohio, like Lancaster area, right? So you know he'd come through. So one day my dad is like telling me like, I should think about sending you to like Zaytuna one summer. This is like late 90s. I'm like, okay. I mean, I don't know what the hell that was. I told my buddy, and my buddy's like, yeah, man, you shouldn't go there. They're Sufis. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? But it sounds weird, so I'll stay away. I didn't really say nothing. It's like my dad's passing interest, passing thought. But when you realize there's these seeds that get planted in, right? Oh, something weird and bad. So let me just like parrot that away. So later, when I got into Salafism, it was like, oh yeah, it all came together. Like, yeah, those heretics. And then I remember I would go to like MSA. I was at Ohio State MSA, man. We were hardcore. So we go to the other MSAs, and there'd be a brother like praying Southern, like, you know, like how I'm a Malik. I call them like I'm Malik now.
Right.
I would see a brother pray with hands to the side, and I'll tell you, man, like the amount of hate I felt in my heart was like, I mean, I'm serious. I remember
I'm laughing because that was my shared experience. So you're literally like jogging my memory about how I used to give it up also.
Yeah, and the thing is, some of these guys I knew, like I may have known them from my Sunday school Islamic Center experience in the early 90s, and now they see them and what happened is we were different because in Columbus we had basically only two Islamic centers. Like we had one by campus and one downtown, right?
Right.
And so the one in by campus, that's where we lived because my dad was a grad student at Ohio State. I went, he would send me there on Saturdays, but I failed like 4 years in a row. Because I was like, first of all, like Saturday morning, the timing was bad. I missed my cartoons, so I was upset about being there.
Oh yeah, for real. Yeah,
you know?
yeah. It's like that's what we're not gonna do. Yeah.
Right. So and you would show up there at like 9 a.m. and be there till like 1 p.m. Like it was rough. And
it was like school.
It was like school. On top of that, there's certainly an Arab bias. Like the teachers would like, if you know Arabic, you were floating by because they were like, you know, they were talking to the kids in Arabic. Because some of these teachers were off the boat themselves. They didn't know it. Their English wasn't the best.
Right.
And so
they was on a fob wave anyway. Right.
Right. And so that's why I remember I was like still in first grade, but I was like 10 or 11 because I would fail it every year. I would never advance. Right. And finally, my dad pulled me out. He puts me into the Islamic Center school with all the Daisies. That's primarily Daisies out in out there. They have like, it's different. They have the Islamic, there's a textbook with English. I'm like, oh, this stuff's actually interesting. And I'm like, I started memorizing surahs then because the chapters of the Quran, because in the transliteration at least. I couldn't read Arabic really crisp yet, but
right.
Based on that, I was memorizing like off the bat. I was in there like memorizing. And like, you know, so yeah, I mean, it was always there. But then, you know, I remember these kids I went to that school with. I see them in college later, and they were like Sufis, and they had like dhikr beads, and they were rocking the shukr gear. And I was just like, man, I had so much enmity in my heart.
And like the whole like sajada symbol, like on the kufis and stuff.
The sajada
like that,
symbol wasn't like the sandal symbol, right? That was
the sandal symbol. Yeah.
That didn't hit too much, but I just remember, man, it was just like looking back, and I remember, and I would give khutbah at Ohio State, and I would be talking about the merits of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and like how we did,
man.
Yeah. So I would remember, and so that was the kind of environment that we were kind of project. Our mindset was like, this was our mindset. And maybe we can talk about as a chaplain how we have to have empathy, which we had none of at the time. Zero.
Literally none.
No, right.
It was complete apathy. Yeah.
Yeah. Our mindset was like we would see
if
like
if you're not down with us, you ain't shit.
Yeah.
Basically, what ended up happening is that Muslims, and this is why I have a very sharp disdain against al-Hizbiyya, religio-sectarianism holistically, especially via the American landscape or the Western hemispheric landscape, because for people indigenous to the Western hemisphere, like Muslim Afro-Americans, Muslim Latino Americans, Muslim European Americans, we've literally used these ahzab, these religio-sectarian groups, as the perfect excuse to perpetuate nigga shit, to perpetuate gang culture, to perpetuate street culture. Yeah. Now, you come from the street, or you come from an urban environment, you come from the hood or whatever, or you just come from the American context or whatever, and then you're Muslim, or you either grew up Muslim or you're a Muslim revert, and you're exposed to these different ahzab, these different religio-sectarian groups. It's a direct mirror to things like Vice Lords, Folk, Peace Stone, Gangsta Disciple, Black Mafia, Bloods and Crips.
Yeah.
Norteños, Sureños, you know what I'm saying? Latin Kings, Nietas, Trinitarios, all of these gangs, right? Their religio manifestations and reflections of those different sets and those different cliques and those different gangs. So instead of people warring over each other, instead of people warring with each other, against each other, based upon like gang affiliations, now you have Muslims literally stepping to each other, pressing each other, fighting each other, cutting each other, shooting each other, killing each other, robbing each other, literally just outright oppressing each other based on these sectarian lines.
Right. For you, when was like, as you had mentioned, like, you wanted to become more serious about the religion, you get into Salafism. It's there, it's available. What point did you kind of realize something wasn't right?
When I started to travel overseas.
Okay. And what year was this?
2005.
Okay.
Alano's best, had I not went to Saudi when I did, Alano's best, I probably would still be into Salafism this very day.
Why do you say that?
Because my eyes were just so open into the whole hypocrisy of Salafism, the whole hypocrisy of religio-sectarianism. That was like literally like my spark, my genesis to really being empowered by Allah to see the bullshit in sectarianism. It was my experiences traveling to the Muslim world, to the Arab world, that really opened up my mind and my heart to the reality of the bullshit.
But
when I became Muslim, right?
Yeah.
I was exposed to Shi'ism, I was exposed to Sufism, I was exposed to Tablighism, Ikhwanism, I was exposed to those things. But it was Salafism that I gravitated more towards because of their like ideals or their pseudo or quasi ideals. But it wasn't until I relinquished myself from Salafism that I realized that, wait a minute, these motherfuckers claim the same shit of the people that they criticize. They just claim different shit for different purposes. And the thing that I came to the conclusion that I came to was that all of these ahzab, all of these religio-sectarian groups, they try to monopolize on one or more concepts within al-Islam, which ironically predate the revelation of the Quran. I'll give you some examples. All of the Anbiya, all of the prophetic individuals, peace be upon them all together, taught people a tasawwuf. Every prophetic individual, every Nabi taught people how to connect to Allah spiritually. Every prophetic individual taught people that.
Yep.
Every ummah, every nation had a salaf. They had a generation or multiple generations of persons whom the members of those the members of those nations, were Islamically required to respect and obey and follow.
Okay.
every ummah had Ahlul Bayt.
Mm-hmm.
They either, you know what I'm saying, especially relative to how many prophets were in those nations.
Sure.
But every ummah had the concept Ahlul Bayt. Muslims who were righteous people who were related to these prophetic individuals whom the people in those nations were religio mandated to respect and to love. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
In terms of what the concept that what people claim about tabligh, right? And the concept of nasiha, advice, giving advice to Muslims, correcting the negativity of Muslims, commanding with good and forbidding from evil, that concept existed prior to the revelation of the Quran. So literally all of the Islamic concepts that these bozos are claiming as their own, as though they were the inceptors or the inventors of it, is 100% false. Because literally all of those concepts, all of those Islamic concepts literally predate the revelation of the Quran. Because literally Al-Islam predates the revelation of the Quran.
Right.
And this is literally proven through the Quran and the Sunnah, the prophetic tradition.
Okay, but I guess I'm not seeing where the problem lies. I guess I see where the problem. So what I'm hearing you say is that, like, so for example, the Salafis.
Like, in other words,
yeah.
Once I broke off from Salafism, I realized that they were literally no different than the other sectarian groups that they were criticizing. That's my point.
And it's like you're emphasizing something that's there, but then de-emphasizing something else that's also there.
Right.
Because this issue, right, about, like, so for example, they would trash on the Sufis for whatever, but then you realize that they have de-emphasized, and they would say things like, well, we have academic spirituality or things of that sort, but you realize that there was, like, I left because, you know, some of the stuff just wasn't, like, you look at the state of your own heart, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then you kind of are like, what is this, the point of religion? To, like, just have beef with people and call people out?
Exactly. Yeah. It was like every refutation was like a damn mixtape. It was like a damn diss track.
When's that dropping? Oh yeah, they would literally use that term.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Abu Khadija just dropped this new tape, this new box set. You know, oh bro, you get that Troy just put out this new set about the Irhabiyun or something. You know, it's some, and they were like some group, right?
Backup.net, all of this type of stuff. Yeah.
So Saudi, now I didn't go to Saudi till 2016. But actually, like, you know, but what is it? What did you see in Saudi that triggered this?
I'll give you some pointers.
Yeah.
But you know, like, people still do this, but it was more fervent when we were coming up, about this whole nostalgia about the Muslim world and Muslim countries, the land of the Muslims, the lands of Tawheed, all this other type of stuff. When you go there, you realize that these motherfuckers are just as corrupt as anywhere else. Mm-hmm. It's just that they're corrupt in different ways. Their facade, their corruption is tweaked to suit their environment. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, Saudi Arabia is literally the only place I've ever traveled to in my life. And keep in mind, I've traveled to 3 continents. Saudi Arabia is the only place on earth I've ever been to in my life where I was personally approached by male and female prostitutes.
Damn.
Like, okay. niggas is literally selling ass outside of the huddle. Like, wow. Literally.
Okay.
And I'm talking about these niggas cut their eyebrows and wear makeup.
Wow. Okay.
Like real shit. And this was back in 2005, so I know for a fact it's worse now. And every single person that I know that has been to Saudi, they've literally confirmed everything that I've said.
Okay.
Like literally the entire city of Mecca, outside of Masjid al-Haram, outside of the sacred mosque, is basically like how Times Square was during the 80s.
Okay.
The entire city of Mecca outside of the Haram is basically a red light district.
I see. So would you say that it's what you saw is because you were into the Salafism that was like the pro-Saudi, pro-government Salafism, right?
It literally, like that Medkhali type shit.
Okay. So your expectation was that And would you say it's almost like, okay, you have all these kibar ulama there, but talking about this, and you got this like straight up like garbage going down?
Yeah. And just the boots on the ground, like condition of the people. I've been to parts of Saudi that make Brownsville and Brooklyn, New York look like Beverly Hills.
Okay.
Like the poverty that I saw there is fucking ridiculous.
Interesting. Okay. So
Like Saudi Arabia is the only place I've ever been to in my life where I've seen street lights that don't work.
Okay.
This is an oil-rich country.
Yeah. You noticed that when because I've only been twice. I went for Hajj and I went for Umrah. So it's like when you are doing the drive, you notice that when you're driving from Mecca to Medina, right? You make those rest area stops. It's kind of like all of a sudden gets real run down. In the UAE, I've been to the UAE. They got more money, but I don't assume the UAE. I'll tell you something though. My experience in Morocco, like in Fez, I found that everybody I met was on some kind of spiritual level. I found Fez to be different, personally.
Like, you mean like as opposed to like Rabat or Marrakesh or Casablanca?
Like I went to Tangier. Tangier had more of like a French vibe to it, to be honest.
I'm not surprised.
You know what I'm saying? Chef Shawoun was the city we went to. My wife enjoyed that city. It's a nice, they're friendly folks. But like Fez, like the average person I would meet would be like our tour guide, I found out was like a munshid. Right? He was one of the Fez singers. Like the Fez singers are different like ranks. So he was like of the younger crew. And so but everyone you'd meet hustlers. I mean, people are always trying to hustle you, but like in general, I found the vibe of like Fez to be different, like in that sense. Like they were like, I'd meet a brother and be like, it's almost like there's a certain level of brotherhood that I found there that I didn't like feel in Saudi. Again, you're in Hajj, you're in Umrah, you're on a high, you're kind of like in this bubble, you're insulated, right?
And you're nostalgic. You're under the spell of nostalgia, of religio nostalgia.
Yeah. But
so there's a lot of things that you miss. There's a lot of red flags that you purposely make yourself like blindsided to.
Right. But to me, Fez felt like different. Fez was like, now part of the reason is that like, I think is that when I went to Fez, I had a plug. My buddy, one of my boys, went to the Cairo-Ain. He graduated from there.
Oh, okay.
So he hooked me up with his friend who was going to be, because my tour guide was an official tour guide, right? He'd always get stopped by the police there in Morocco. And you see stuff. You see like, okay, there's like more, but he would tell, but he was just an average dude. He wasn't like a sheikh, but he also was like he was 30 years old, divorced with a kid. His gig is basically singing at various like molids and things of that sort, and other side gigs he can pick up, right?
So he was just basically getting his hustle on, right,
kind of thing, right? But then again, he would talk about like he would tell me like, bro, he's always emphasizing like the deen, like in casual conversation all the time, right? I remember one time we were driving out of the parking lot. He's like, brother, he's like, Maheen, excuse me, we have to stop. There's this whole concept of like awliya there, right, in Fez. It's like, so he's like, this brother is this person's a wali. I did go give salams to him and ask him for dua, kind of thing. There's this blind man sitting there, you know what I'm saying? So he like got out and was like, he stopped the car and I'm like in the, and to go greet this man. So there's things that I saw there that I was like, now granted, I don't know, it's anecdotal at the end of the day, right?
Right.
But again, see an average guy who like, on that level, and the people, and then he'd be driving the car around, and he's like, his buddy would jump in the car, and they'll be like, yo, mashallah, come to my house for tea, etc. The sheikh, we'd meet him, we'd invite us for tea to his house. I mean, there's things that you saw that I felt that I was like, this, I guess, is probably some sense of brotherhood there. Versus the others, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, to all his own. So then, once you remove this veneer, how do you then, when you come back? Because has the thought ever crossed your mind when you have this revelation that, wait a second, you're in Mecca, this is the birthplace of it's the capital I Islam, through the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you've got like male hookers out there outside the haram,
like quite literally.
Yeah. Now, are you like, did that thought cross your mind? Like, is this religion really true? If this is the state?
No,
never. Okay,
that never crossed my mind. No.
Okay.
But what did cross my mind is that I left the United States to deal with this type of bullshit, because shit like that never happened to me in the US. Even in spite of the fact that I've traveled different places around the world, I've only lived in the United States. You know what I'm saying? I grew up in the United States in my whole life. I lived in the US my whole life. That never happened to me. I've been to Atlanta, that never happened to me. I've been to San Francisco, that never happened to me. I've been to Boston, Chi-Town, Baltimore, DC, all of these different major cities, and that never happened to me. But yet I go to Saudi for Hajj.
Yeah.
And got male and female prostitutes trying to throw tricks at me in ihram. Like, what the fuck? Like,
right.
Like, that shit crazy.
It's something that's unimaginable. But
yeah.
So when you get back, I guess what was your?
I became a hellraiser.
Yeah.
Straight up. In my mind, I'm like, yo, fuck this shit.
So you came back. It was like more or less like
that was literally like me coming back. I mean, my experience there included, but culminating to me returning to the U.S. That was literally like the beginning of the end of like my Salafism adventure. Because because 2 years later, I had completely stopped considering myself Salafi at all.
Okay. So, but what was how would you acknowledge your like understanding of your relationship with God at that, or Allah at that time, right?
That never wavered. It's just that my jaded nostalgia was completely shattered. And I'm grateful for that, because that's what I needed. I needed that nostalgia to be shattered and broken into 1,000 pieces.
Okay.
That was necessary.
So it took you a couple of years after you get that. What happens next? Because I want to ask, because I listened to your podcast with your show with the two ladies. They talk about relationships and stuff like that. So I was like, all right. Because I was like trying to piece a timeline together on some things, and I was like, was there a point of time where you kind of like fell back a little bit as far as like maybe some obligations, struggling with things like that of that sort?
Well, I mean, in terms of struggle, every human being struggles, right?
Sure.
So our lives are literally like the stock market.
Right.
You have up days, down days, kind of like flat days, flat days down, flat days up. Though, and like those interviews that I gave, those are just examples of those, of that trajectory, if that makes sense.
I got you. I got you. Yeah. So the now that how long have you been working in the chaplaincy field?
Since 2014.
So good amount of time, 6 years. So it's like now you have a different reality. It seems like there's a when we were strict, when we were into Salafism, it was very, I would say life was easier in some ways. It was black and white. We didn't have to have much nuance. We could say like, this person's a deviant and we ain't associated with that person. Or look at these people who do this stuff. Look at that. Right. Okay.
Right. It was like the perfect excuse to be judgmental.
Exactly. Right. It was, at the end of the day, you think about it, I wonder if people just stick to it because it keeps it basic and simple. Right.
Yeah. People grow comfortable with being apathetic and judgmental.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, definitely.
So now you have, we're living in a world that is changing. What's defined as, culturally or morally acceptable is changing. When you and I were growing up, it was very common to hear the slur for homosexual all the time. You know what we're not talking about, right?
Yeah.
So now, and then I started.
Well, I mean, there's several words. There's several words.
Right. But like That was, and I remember I heard a talk by Dr. Yasser Qadi a few years back.
Yeah.
He was talking about how the language, even though we might disagree with the lifestyle, it is not befitting of us to like fall into that, use that kind of language sometimes, because it's, at the end of the day, it's to have like, you know, there's still a requisite like adab that goes into it, and we tend to have, we used to like ignore it because part of it was like, oh, it was just what was I gonna say? It was just it was easy. It was culturally convenient at the time, right? Now, on the flip side,
I mean, if you call somebody faggot, you can literally get arrested. You can
oh
literally
yeah,
lose your job.
I mean, oh,
Like, literally,
you would lose your job for sure
literally.
if it got out. Yeah, I think it's more in that space, but like, as you're a chaplain now and you're seeing like different things. So I did an interview with a transgender hafiz on this channel.
Interesting.
Okay.
Interesting.
And
I mean, did the person disclose their birth gender?
Yes.
Or did they choose to not disclose that?
They did. I mean, I knew it. So the way I'll tell you how it went down, right? So on this channel,
so were they genetically male or genetically female?
Biologically male.
Okay.
They're biologically male, and they're now identifying as a female, right?
Okay.
But I was, you know, it's kind of, as someone who is like, you know, as a host of another podcast that's considered to be conservative, right? You know, I was like, because the essence of my show is like, the whole point of the interview was like, all right, this individual, I don't think just woke up one day and decided to be a female. I don't think it works like, you know, it doesn't, like, people like to like make it, people like to make real like reductionist theories and all this stuff.
And it's untrue and it's dishonest. But one thing I could definitely say, and this is exclusively coming from my research, pertaining to a tajneen, jinn influence versus mental illness.
Yeah.
And it's coming from my personal experience about counseling people with sexual identity crisis, gender identity crisis, homosexuality, al-liwat. One thing that I know for a fact from my professional and personal experience is that about 98% of people who I've counseled pertaining to issues relating to al-liwat, homosexuality, they were sexually abused at least once in their lives.
Okay.
Like literally, like in summation, 98% of I'm talking about Muslim and non-Muslim.
Okay.
Literally 98% of the people who I've ever counseled pertaining to this subject of al-liwat, this subject of homosexuality, in terms of them actually officially identifying as being homosexual or having homosexual urges or tendencies, what have you. Yeah. Literally 98% of those people who I've personally counseled, they were sexually abused at least once in their entire life.
Making a statement like that, is that something that can be problematic for you in today's environment?
No, because I'm exclusively coming from a professional realm.
Okay.
And I mean, obviously it's anecdotal because of my professional experience.
Right.
But like I said, I have no reason to lie about that. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
and then also we know the reality of the jinn world is that specifically, if you are a victim of sexual abuse or just any type of sexual experience that a person has, positive or negative, in that moment in time when you're having that sexual experience, your iman plummets to such a low degree that, for example, when Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, this narration that I'm about to say is actually recorded by Al-Dhahabi in Al-Kaba'ir, the major sins. And Al-Dhahabi, he was one of the top 3 students of Ahmed ibn Taymiyyah, Muhammad ibn Uthman al-Dhahabi. So that narration in which Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, the zani, the thought, is not a believer while they're thoughting. The intoxicated is not a believer while they're intoxicated. The thief is not a believer while they're thieving, right? But that narration, it doesn't mean that the person is a disbeliever. It means that in that moment in time, that they're committing those actions, their iman leaves them. And there's another narration which complements this, but it also specifically talks about a zina thottery, in which Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, whoever is thotting, whoever is committing a zina thottery, their iman leaves them just as quickly as the shirt leaves the back. So let's say you got on a t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
As easy as it is for you to take off your t-shirt, that's how easy it is for your iman to leave your heart. Now, that doesn't mean that you're a non-Muslim or you're a disbeliever in that moment, but what it does mean is that your iman is very, very low. So when your iman is very, very low, this is something that I've researched and I've studied, is that when you're committing something like a zina, any manifestation of a zina, doesn't matter whether it's bestiality, al-ikhtisab, child molestation, rape, fornication, adultery, homosexuality, whatever. When you're committing these actions, your faith, your iman is so low that it literally opens the floodgates. It opens the channels and the gates for the jinn, the fire beings, and it makes it easier for them to influence you and even possess you.
Wow. I know about the hadith, the narration, right? I didn't know about the jinn angle.
Yeah. And then also, like I said, by virtue of the fact that from my professional and personal experience, 98% of these people who are dealing with homosexual issues, by virtue of most of them being sexually abused at least once in their entire life, there's definitely jinn activity, jinn influence taking place. And in terms of at-tajneen, jinn influence, jinn possession, it's possible, number one, it's possible for a person to be jinn possessed by more than one jinn.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's also possible for a jinn to influence or possess multiple human beings. And it's possible for homosexual jinns to influence or possess heterosexual people. Okay. And for lack of a better term, turn them out.
I see. I got you. Okay. So I want to so this is the so I've actually interviewed 2 trans people on my show.
Right.
The second one hasn't aired yet. It'll probably air in sometime in December, waiting for him to, give me.
Were they both biologically male, or was one biologically male, biologically female?
The second one, which has not released yet, is biologically female.
Oh,
but,
okay.
But to me, they're very. When I do the interviews, I did both these interviews in person. They weren't over Zoom. They were right in front of me, right?
Right.
And they were. But it's very different experiences from my vantage point, right? So the first person, it was a referral. Like I knew, like an old friend of mine, was kind of his youth director. So my buddy was like my age, and this dude is like in his early 20s. So he would, we were talking about, we were catching up, and I'm like, hey, yeah, my channel is about I'll talk to anybody. It doesn't matter. It's not a Muslim channel. It can be, I want to talk to people. I want to understand where they're coming from, even though I have my own beliefs, right?
Right.
I think I believe that part of being honest with yourself is you can have conversation with others, even if you don't agree with them. You can hear them out and have a dialogue, because that's how you grow. And maybe something that maybe
now it makes sense why the Mad Mamluks wouldn't host me, because I'm too unfiltered. Now it makes sense.
Well, I don't know about that. To be honest, I'll tell you why. I think it's because Mad Mamluks. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. It was just. I don't think he did research. I just thought he saw another chaplain, and we've had chaplains on before, and it was very reductionist. I don't think it was anything beyond that.
Oh, okay.
You know what I'm saying? But I think with this channel, so and my buddies asked me, don't you think you're gonna get criticized for giving him a platform? Which, by the way, and we can talk about this idea of giving people platforms, to me, I am very personally, philosophically, unless you're a liar, like a blatant liar, I will give you a platform. Right. That's pretty much how I don't believe in deep, because I'm in today's world, social media, you can make your own platform. And at the end of the day,
literally,
I don't do this. I make zero money off this thing, right?
And realistically, you're not doing anyone a favor.
Right.
It's just about information sharing and collaborating. It's about
collaborating, but also also understanding people, because it's
right.
So long story short, so this guy, he's biologically male.
Right.
He's public about it. This podcast is available. It's on YouTube.
Right.
Bangladeshi origin. Goes to madrasa, did hifz, starts and realizes he's same-sex inclined around 15, 16 years old, right? Which seems like kind of late, because I think you're like, generally I started noticing girls being like 12 or 13, or even earlier, 11, sometimes some folks. But he's at 16 is when he first realized he had attraction, and it was to dudes. So he like tried to fight it, and then he found justification for it. There's a guy named Scott Kugel. You may be familiar with his works, and basically decided to justify it. And the LGBT community and the LGBT Muslim subcommunity embraced him. And I was like, so that's something we have to tackle, because if you have these inclinations, there's going to be a group of people that are going to be like, oh, we down with you. You don't got to change.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's just like that statement, birds of a feather flock together. It's very cliche, but there's a lot of truth and honesty to that statement.
Right. So then he decides to like pursue that lifestyle, right? While still being a hafiz, and does his revision, because he has like and I think part of it is like, I mean, you don't being a hafiz is hard. So you're not going to store it out of the way. So I almost wonder if like, it's like you have so much skin in the game to like just give that, just like forget it all, right?
Right, right.
So then you're doing that. So I'm like, all right, so now you're indulging in your same-sex behavior. And then he's telling the stories. Like, then he started realizing that, well, he became more aware of systemic oppression for Black folks, for immigrants, for homosexuals, etc. And then he started learning about the patriarchy. And he wanted to do an experiment on the patriarchy. So he was going to do that by dressing up as a woman. Okay. And he was going to try it out for 2-3 months, see how it felt. And he's like, oh, I really liked it. And so he started identifying as a woman. And in my head, I'm like, yo, that's like
literally textbook Tajdeen. That's literally textbook Jinn influence.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
But it's almost
especially
like
the way you articulated it.
Yeah.
That's textbook Jinn influence.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the show's available for you to check out if you want, But he tells the whole story. And in my head, I'm thinking like, this reminds me of like Allah talking about when you allow your desires to be your God, that he just leaves you to it.
Allah says that in chapter 25, verse 43, Surah Al-Furqan, chapter of the standard. Allah says, have you seen those who take their desires as their God? Are you then their enabler?
Right. Yeah. It's essentially like you open the door, there's a fight for it. I was empathetic in the sense that like in the beginning, the community has to have there are people who have same-sex inclinations. Fact, right?
I mean, the fact that it's addressed through revelation proves it.
Yeah, right. But like now, how do we handle that? Because could we? And I think that's what I was like. That's a really hard challenge, because I don't know how I honestly don't. So that's one story. So to that one, I was like, in my back of my head, I was like, this is a train wreck, okay? And seems like completely the fact that it was like I want to do a study in patriarchy and then decided to be a female. I was like, what? Like I was like, okay, that's one. Second example, this individual is biologically female, and I will say him because to me he's a dude. I met him a year and a half ago. I didn't know he was Muslim, and he was a producer for another podcast that I was like collaborating with. And so met him up. Afterwards we messaged back and forth. He told me he's Muslim. I'm like, cool. And I found out he's trans. But I'm like, I didn't know what that meant. I was like, okay, but I was like, I want to observe. I want to learn. So we stayed in touch. We have a good relationship. So when I did an interview, I thought he was a biological male, but maybe at some point had taken some female hormones or something,
right? And
may have done in that because I was like, all right, trans is a kind of a spectrum, I think. So maybe that's what it is. But he tells me, oh, he's biologically female. Okay, I'm like, well, what? And like, I found this out in the interview. I didn't know that. So I'm like, okay. And then he's like,
it was like a classic "what the fuck" moment.
Yeah, and I was like, in my head, I'm like, but he's explaining to me his upbringing. He's like talking about like how when he was having his periods, he would be throwing up all the time. He became physically sick, and he'd always had a higher levels of natural testosterone. And then I was like, huh. And I was talking to some people in the medical field. They're like, okay, that could happen. That's like almost like it felt like someone who was like a dude, but was born with a vagina. If that makes any sense.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because especially people who say that, oh, I knew I was a man trapped in a woman's body, or I knew I was a woman trapped in a man's body. They say that, oh, I knew since I was 5, or I knew since I was 6. Anyone who claims that or who makes that case, especially prior to puberty, there's a specific class of the jinn, of the fire beings, that they specifically target influencing women and children, specifically people under the age of puberty.
Okay.
So all of those people who were saying that they're the quote unquote wrong gender, right? It's very evident that these people were jinn influenced prior to puberty.
Okay.
It's very obvious that they were influenced. And like I said, it's very probable that those persons were jinn influenced by homosexual jinns. It's very probable.
Okay, and on top of that, he was previously married to a straight female. Right? Like because he decided to transition to a male around age 14 or 15 or something, like, around the time, because it seemed like there was being a tomboy is one thing. I don't think it was a tomboy. It seemed to me like, oh, his natural build, muscular build, physical build,
right,
and all that stuff. And then when he's having his periods,
it definitely wasn't a tomboy thing, because realistically, most tomboys are actually heterosexual females.
Yeah, right. So that to me was like, and the fact that he was like, and he's like, I only date straight women. Because he's like, so he's a trans male, and he only dates, because the other dude, the first person I spoke about, remember in the beginning I was like, he's same-sex inclined, so he's a dude who likes dudes. I'm like, what are you into now? Right. And he's like, oh, he's into both. He's bisexual now. He's a trans female bisexual or like preference. So again, that adds, I forget, that was so you just keep going down. So the whole point in the beginning of being into only like dudes, well, that went out the window. Let's open it up for everybody.
Literally.
Yeah.
And like you said, the other person is like the same way.
So the other person now, so the second one, he's a biological female who identifies as a male,
right?
But is exclusively into straight females, right? And was married to a straight female. So that to me was like, it's a different spectrum. But for me, like my experience with dealing with the person seems like a dude. Like it doesn't like register that this is a biological female. Whereas the first,
you know what the irony is.
What's
like
that?
When you mentioned about the argument about quote unquote patriarchy, or how some people try to dub it toxic patriarchy or toxic masculinity, whatever, right?
Sure.
The irony is that the most misogynistic, the most anti-women people in human history are in fact homosexual people, especially people who are transformers, especially people who play the transgender card. And I'm explain why. Men who imitate women, right? They literally try to pontificate and claim that they can quote unquote be better women than biogenetic women. And females, they have so much self-hate that they're dealing with that they would rather live their life as a man than as a woman. Because I tell people all the time, you don't have to be a man to be a misogynist. So if you're a woman and you're literally opting out your natural gender to imitate the opposite gender, it literally means you hate yourself as a woman.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So because I found like I have a lot more empathy for the second situation though. Those two that I mentioned, right?
Right.
Mainly because at a level of like just of like at what you see at the surface level, right? Because the first person was like he's identified as a girl. I'm like, no, you're a dude. Like I'm looking, I see a dude. I mean, like you can't tell me anything else. I mean, like,
right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean,
well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Islamically, in terms of how men and women are judged in terms of al-liwat, homosexuality,
right,
there's actually more mercy in terms of the judgment of women as opposed to men, because Islamically, the punishment for female homosexuality is not death.
right, yeah,
Because for women, they would be punished according to their marital status. Now, let's say, for example, if a woman was married, but she's committing adultery with a female, then obviously, by definition, she would be punished as an adulteress, which is the death penalty, right?
okay,
Or if she were divorced, because Islamically, if you're divorced and you have sex outside of marriage, you're still to be punished as an adulterer or an adulteress, which is the death penalty. So if the person was never married, then they're to be punished as a regular fornicator, right?
So you're saying, wait a second, you're saying a divorced person is punished like they were married? Why is that?
By virtue of the fact that you were already married. Because fornication, Islamically, literally means you've never been married before at all.
Oh, okay. Is there khilaf on this? I haven't actually heard that.
I'm sure there's scholars who differ on that. I'm sure about that.
Okay,
yeah,
I got you. Okay. Now,
but I mean, it's just like when you fill out information, right?
Yeah.
And it says single, married, divorced, right? So if you've been divorced, obviously you can't be like, oh, I'm single. You would either have to put married or divorced.
Right.
Because single, by definition, implies that you've never been married before.
Sure. Absolutely.
So Islamically, it works the same way.
Yeah. Now
for men, in terms of the punishment for male homosexuality, the marital status of a man doesn't matter. The punishment is still the same.
Right.
It's just that it's just like among the Salaf, among the companions and the followers, the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, they had ikhtilaf, they had religio-scholastic differing as per how to punish male homosexuality. Because Muhammad, peace be upon him, he left it open-ended. He said, whomever witnesses two men approaching each other sexually, the giver and the taker are to be executed. But obviously, Islamically, we know that has to be predicated on what Allah mentions about az-zina in the Quran, is that you have to actually visually see it. Right. Now that gets very complex and complicated because number one, what are you doing in an environment where you can actually see that? That's number one. Number two, why didn't you stop it? So there's a lot of complexity and complication pertaining to that. And that's why during the lifetime of Muhammad, peace be upon him, no companion, may Allah be pleased with him, was ever caught for committing adultery or fornication or bestiality or rape or male homosexuality. All of the peoples who were punished for this, they confessed it. They weren't caught doing it.
Okay. Right. So it's almost impossible to like catch somebody based upon
it's literally almost impossible.
Yeah, it's almost like I wonder how today's world could you use pornography as, because pornography gets millions of views and everyone's seeing it.
That actually counts as confession. Because if you're purposely putting your business out there, that's confessionary.
Well,
so realistically, Islamically, that can be used in a court of law, but then the question has to be, how did you come across this information and why do you have this information? Let's say, for example, if someone is accusing someone of any sexual crime, right? If you have this recorded, how did you get this recording and why do you have it? And then also, why didn't you prevent this from happening yourself?
I got you. So
culpability is also a factor.
Yes. So basically, it's like you would nullify. So let's say, for example, like
no, it's not that it's nullified.
Oh,
but you're also self-culpable also because you obviously you witnessed it, right? So it's like somebody watching porno, right? And they see somebody that they know.
Yeah.
And then they snitch on them. Like, dude, like, how do you know that? I'll give you a perfect example. When George Floyd was murdered by the police, right?
Yep. And
this was actually shameful. There were actually Muslims who were spreading this information, right? You had Muslims on social media saying, oh, George Floyd was an ex-porn star, whatever. Number one, him being an ex-porn star, it literally has nothing to do that he was murdered like a dog in the street. That's number one. Number two, it's almost like people are saying that he deserved to get murdered because he was an ex-porn star. And that's retarded, right? Because Allah says in chapter 5, verse 8, Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter of the Grail, Allah says, and never let your hatred against any people prevent you from behaving justly.
Sure.
Him being an ex-porn star doesn't justify him being murdered the way he was murdered. That's not a justification.
Right.
Number three, how the hell did you find out that George Floyd was an ex-porn star? Number four, why do you know as a Muslim that he's an ex-porn star? And then as a Muslim, why would you spread something like that?
So I guess if you want to have the most husna done, you could just say, well, I Googled George Floyd and it showed up that he was a porn star without watching the video. But, you know, it's like, but there's still the element of spreading it or verification. Verification, right? How do you know? Because it's like the whole thing is like, oh yeah, me and my three boys, we all got Pornhub premium accounts, and we caught this dude that we know. And
exactly,
like how do you?
It's like, dude, like why do you know that? Why? You know what I'm saying? Like the fact that they even know by definition is problematic.
Right. I got you. So I wanted to get back.
Now, obviously, things like rape or child molestation is a different category because 4 witnesses is not a requirement in terms of rape or child molestation.
So what about a scenario where you know 2 people are getting it on, and the dude just has a secret camera set up?
Well, that's haram by definition because that counts as espionage. And like, for example, there's a narration in which one of the companions, may Allah be pleased with him, he went to Muhammad, peace be upon him, and said, I knocked on my neighbor's door and he didn't answer. So I went around the back of his house and I saw him drinking, right? And then Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, if he would have caught you, he would have been justified to gouge your eyes out.
Damn.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Yeah.
So let's say it was like, let's say in this act, the people, it was a secret, like the dude set the camera up, but the girl didn't know. She couldn't be judged accordingly because under that premise.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
But what is true is that that person would also be punished also because of the espionage, because of spying on that person.
Meaning that, like,
and then also it depends on what type of sexual offense it is. That also depends.
Let's make it worst case. She was married and she's having zina. She's fornicating with some other dude. Right?
Well, actually, that's not the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario would be something like child molestation or bestiality.
Okay.
That would be the worst case scenario.
True. That's a good point. So in your work as chaplaincy, how difficult is it to there's this idea of what's in the text, because, versus, and then the reality of people on the ground. How challenging is that?
It's literally a case-by-case basis. Literally, like me personally, I function with a mantra that I've coined for myself that I use. It's called REP. Respect, empathy, patience. Respect pertaining to viewing every human being as your human equal. Not viewing them as inferior, not viewing them as superior, giving everyone equality. Human, spiritual equality. Empathy is pertaining to allowing yourself to put yourself in the place of that person in terms of their struggles, even if you don't have a shared experience with that person, right? Showing compassion, right? That's what empathy is, compassion, mercy, those type of things.
Yep.
And then patience is pertaining to enduring what you have learned or heard or listened about that person's narrative. Because obviously people, they tell us things, they disclose things that are very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's either uncomfortable for them to share or it's uncomfortable to listen to and to endure. But all three of those things, respect, empathy, and patience, are necessary in order to empower people, to uplift them. Because it's not our job to fix people.
Right.
As chaplains, it's our job to empower people. And just like when Allah says in chapter 13, verse 11, Allah says, verily, Allah doesn't change what's within any people until they change what's within themselves.
Okay.
So if you want the correction, if you want the change, it has to start introspectively. It has to start internally.
Is that something you had that mindset before you went into the field? Or is that something you kind of developed over the last 6 years?
Combination of both.
Okay. So, like, I guess what drove you to get into the field in the first place?
Well, I mean, obviously, I can say for a fact in hindsight that this is something that Allah had mapped out for me. Okay. It was never my actual motive to be a chaplain. Okay. Mainly because I didn't really know what the hell being a chaplain was prior to 2014. But there was a Muslim brother, may Allah bless him. He was actually my first CPE, clinical pastoral education supervisor. And for years, he was trying to get me into chaplaincy. And I kept avoiding him. I kept dodging him. And just as Allah would have it, I was like transitioning careers, jobs, and stuff. And I said to myself, you know what? Let me give this chaplaincy shit a try.
Sure.
And I kid you not, it was the most intelligent career choice that I ever made in my life, that I ever could have made. Because every single day that Allah allows me to live and work as a chaplain, I'm literally making the world better through making people better. And I tell people all the time, it only takes one person to make the world better. And it only takes one person to make the world worse. And Allah has given us the potential to do both.
Wow. Okay.
We have the choice to either make the world better or to make the world worse. We have to make the decision whether we're going to make the world better or whether we're going to make the world worse. But through Allah's mercy, every single day that I live and work as a chaplain, I make the world better through my discipline, through my profession.
Sure. Now, segue a little bit. You got time? There's. I want to get into your fashion sense at the end. Kind of end on something light because I like your style, cool. You know. But this conversation is always coming up is the like how Muslims in America, segue. This is a very Muslim specific topic. Is like how we navigate politics, secular politics, and the issue of systemic racism in the United States.
Honestly, that's literally an entire
second podcast.
That deserves an episode by itself.
All right, well, we'll table that for next time, okay? And
that definitely deserves its own like episode
because
sure.
So this is something that I want to really explore with you. Since
you mentioned that, I'm actually going to give you some materials that I actually wrote on my blog about that.
Okay, I'll check that out.
And we can pattern the discussion based on that.
Cool, sounds good. So now you're also you go by the Muslim model, right?
Right.
And you model as like is like a side hustle kind of thing, or like what's going on?
I've literally modeled before. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and I put up modeling pics every now and again. Yeah.
Is that something as a kid growing? So when I'm this channel is called Sultan and Sneakers. Then the etymology of the podcast, and you could take it different ways. At the end of the day, when I first started the channel, it was kind of like the name represents who I am, right? I'm a sneakerhead.
Gotcha.
You know what I'm saying?
Gotcha.
So one thing as a sneakerhead I always understood is like New York. There's two centers of fashion we considered, I would think, in the world: Tokyo and New York City. And people could say Paris too.
I mean, there's a lot of different fashion epicenters.
Yeah.
But New York is the main epicenter of fashion.
Yeah. So is fashion something that you were always interested in growing up?
Yeah, it's just an element of the culture.
Right. What would you say your style was as a kid? Or as a high schooler?
I'll be honest, I wasn't really that fashionable prior to I'll be honest, I didn't really have a sophisticated fashion sense.
No, but you probably had, you were probably into so I'll give you an example, right? So somebody
in terms of fashion, I was literally all over the place.
Okay.
I didn't really understand the significance of what fashion was.
Mm.
Ironically, until after I started venturing into Salafism, because that's when I started to really, when I started to break away from Salafism, because I used to wear thobes and kufis and all that other type of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I started to break away from that. And I would say that's when I really developed and coined my own individual fashion niche for myself.
I guess what I'm asking is this. I'll give you an example. So when I was in high school, my dad, so if this can segue to the next channel,
Right.
The first time I want to say in elementary school, it was like whatever. You wore whatever your parents gave. You didn't care. You go to middle school. The first time I noticed like clothes as an expression of self was like in middle school. So all the metalheads, they wore like the flannel grunge shirts with the shirts open.
Right. Or like the goth people, they wore all black and stuff like that. Yeah. Well, you know, when I was coming up, regardless of what hierarchy you were in school, people pretty much dressed the same.
Okay.
Pretty much. I mean, obviously you had kind of like the high-end kids who they got whatever they wanted in terms of fashion and stuff like that, and people who didn't get what they want, they had to settle. But people were basically interested in the same types of fashion. So a lot of things were, and like I said, like I grew up in an era where even if you weren't Afro-American or Latino-American, we had the same culture.
Okay.
So we were interested in the same things pertaining to fashion in terms of like the labels and sneakers, all other type of stuff. Like, so in that sense, it was like all of us kind of had like the same idea of what our fashion sense was, but obviously based on socioeconomic realities, we had the affordability or the lack of affordability to express that differently.
Yeah. So, well, but you know, I always, because I think for us, I'll say this is funny. I had a friend. So 93 was when Doggy Style came out.
Yeah,
Snoop's album, right? So I had a friend. He's another Bengali kid. He's a year older than me. He would cop all like he had Dre's album, he had the Chronic, he had all that stuff, right? My dad didn't like me listening to music, not from a haram point of view, but like he was like the influence, like there was that whole anti-blackness narrative. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like he literally would say in Bengali, if I translate, is like, this is black culture, people,
basically.
Right, exactly. You're right. And so my boy, he had so he started dressing like Snoop. You know, he used to, and look, I mean, it was dope. I was gonna lie. So we would see that, and his dad was like pretty loose about it, right?
Right.
At the same time, it was just like my, you know, I would do whatever I could do to get away with what my dad got me. So if my dad got me a pair of jeans, I made sure I had it sag down like the back pocket was down on my calf.
Right,
you know what I'm saying? Like it was like that, you know, and that was because you know, DC kids, our dads got us tidy whities. Like, Dad, you can't give us tidy whities. You got to give us boxers, right?
Right.
Because you need the boxers. Right. So, but for me, in the general, but my friend circle, a lot of times were these other Bengali kids, and we'd see each other every weekend because our parents would want to get together and like eat Bengali food and like have their like parties, their dinner parties. So what would me and my boys do? This is like late middle school, early high school. Is that we would have East Bay catalogs. Remember East Bay?
Yeah, of course. Everybody remember East Bay. Yeah.
So a few of my boys, maybe their dads did a little bit better. Like some of them, they would get a pair of Jordans.
Everything in East Bay was overpriced.
Yeah. So
everything.
But what we would do, we would spend the entire 2-3 hours at dinner party talking about gear. Oh, this kid at school got this. This kid at school got his Pele jacket. This kid got a Carl Kanai overalls, right? And there'll be occasionally you find something like the magazines. What's the one where you see like shit? It wasn't not Jet, but like I mean, like it was not The Source either, but another like hip hop magazine.
You mean Double XL?
Maybe, yeah. Some of those, you know, one of those. I forget which one it was, but one of the guys would bring that to this party. I'd bring the East Bay, and you know, and that's all we do is talk about all the shit we couldn't afford that we wanted that all the other kids at school had.
Right.
So that shapes how I kind of dress today, in a sense, because a lot of my sneaker addiction is reminiscing that now I have a job. So
to compensate, right? So it's like now I can afford it, and now I got it, right?
At the same time,
for me, my experience, is that like my parents, especially my mom, and especially after my pops died, she didn't want us attached to name brand labels.
Okay.
So she would purposely go out of her way to buy us like off-brand shit. Okay. She would do that shit on purpose.
Okay.
But in hindsight, as the law would have it, I benefited immensely from that because I was never attached to the materialistic type of shit. Like, you're speaking to a person who never owned a pair of Jordans.
Okay.
And I've been wearing name brand sneakers since the 4th grade. I've never paid more than $100 for a pair of sneakers, ever. And like I said, I've been wearing name brand sneakers since the 4th grade. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that, by definition,
but I guess how do you reconcile with that earlier statement? Because you just said your mom brought you off-brand stuff, but your sneakers are still name brand.
It was weird. It was a weird crossover of contradictions.
You want to know why it is? I think she probably had enough common sense to know that she couldn't send you to school wearing like something from JJ Giveaway.
No, trust me, my mother didn't give a damn.
Oh, really? Okay.
She didn't give a damn.
Because I feel like sneakers was a thing. I feel like you could get, like, school-wise, you could get away with, like, wearing Nikes and having off-brand other stuff. But as long as your shoes were on point.
That's true. That's true. And even till this day, right, there was a point in my life where I would only really focus on name brand shit when it came to my sneakers.
Okay.
But I still had that, even, like I said, even till this day, I have never paid more than $100 for a pair of sneakers, ever.
Okay.
And that's a staple rule that I keep for myself.
I got you.
It doesn't matter what name brand it is. I'm not paying more than $100 for a pair of sneakers.
Yeah, I obviously cannot.
That's just me personally.
Right. I mean, that for me, I would say I used to be like that. I used to always. What happened for me was, it's interesting because, like, go to high school. You go to college. Once you go to college, it's like you have different priorities. When I got into the dean, going through Salafism, now, yeah, you're right. What I had to do, any pair of pants I had to get them hemmed up above my ankles.
Exactly.
My mom got so pissed at me because my dad got me a suit for my interviews because I was like,
you hemmed this suit.
Yeah. And it became a trend later in mainstream, now it's like people, you see it, but I remember I had an internship at like this construction company, the state Department of Transportation, state of Ohio. And I walked in one day with these well, the supervisor saw me. He was like, "Is it gonna rain today?"
Right. Yeah.
Because everything, because like my jeans I would roll up, but like everybody other stuff. I remember there's this brother named Abdullah. He's from New York. He's a convert. He took me to the Somali Mall. He took me and his other brother.
Yeah.
He was new in Salafism. Took us both to the Somali Mall in Columbus. There's a tailor there. He would do all the brothers hemming, right?
Oh, okay.
So I had some in my pants. I would tell him, like, I only want them right at the ankle because I'm not getting my freaking suit pants hemmed at my calves.
Yeah, that shit is retarded. Yeah.
But it's like whatever I got to do to stay out of the hellfire for the hadith.
Right.
That's all I was trying to do.
Right.
So, but like the other brother was like, he was newer, and Abdullah was pushing him. Was like, yo, you can get your pants hemmed up just to the ankle, but the sunnah is to have it up a little higher. You know what I'm saying? You want to be on the sunnah, right? You want to be on the sunnah, right? He's like, yeah. I was like, all right then. So like,
honestly, when it comes to like al-hizbiyas, religio-sectarianism,
right?
It doesn't matter which hizb that you're talking about. It doesn't matter which religio-sectarian group that you're talking about. Peer pressure is a real thing.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, literally, like, one of the most important narrations that I ever read and studied is found in a Tirmidhi, in which Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, La takunu imma'atan, which basically means don't be a dick rider. Like, don't be a lackey, don't be a flunky, don't be a groupie. Ironically, this hadith, this narration in At-Tirmidhi is listed as hadith 2007. And ironically, I left Salafism in 2007.
That's funny. Wow. 2007 is about the same time I was like phasing out. I had to leave Columbus, Ohio to really break off, to be honest.
Okay.
Right? That for me, because it like sucks you in. And it's in a smaller town. It's like you really can't go far.
Like in a place like New York City, it's easy to break away from certain things because New York is a big city. You can get lost on purpose.
Right.
It's easy to get lost on purpose, to like cut people off and lose contact with people. That's easy to do in New York City.
Right. But it's like each group has their own fashion sense, right? So you hear about the East Coast Salafis like having the camo capris and the Timbs. Right? Because I used to have some Timbs. I remember I'd walk in and the brothers would be like, "Oh, mashallah, you got some Timbs today," you know? So it was like certain things were like, even though it was part of the dunya, it was like, you know?
I mean, you got Salafis who are sneakerheads.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's kind of where
to this day. Right.
To this day. So, and then you were trying to like navigate that a little bit and, you know, and then once I started work and then but at the same time, I was like, oh, I was a single dude and I was an MSA president and I was like, now I gotta be on the lookout. So I didn't wear denim either. And I was like, at school, I would wear like either button up and slacks because I was like, hey, I gotta press some sisters, man. You know what I'm saying? I'm still a single dude. And then after I got married, I was like, I ran into a friend. I ran into this dude. I met this brother named Amr, good friend of mine. He's a year older than me. And this dude had like he probably at one time would have 150, 200 pairs of shoes in his closet, right? Damn. And I remember, so we started hanging out. I meet him at Iman, Inner City Muslim Action Network in Chicago. Yeah. And I met these other brothers there. They had like, you know, and I was like, it kind of rekindled. I was like, wait, these guys are my age, but I don't, because I felt like I had gotten too old for that, right?
Got you.
And then I started and my wife is a traditional Bangladeshi. She grew up in Mississippi.
Oh wow!
And her entire you know, and I think for her, she always noticed like most guys around, you're shaped by what you grew up around. So I guess for her,
product of your environment.
Yeah,
definitely.
Most of them were like preppy white boys with like that shaggy Southern hair, not with like wearing like blazers, like old Miss frat boys kind of look, you know,
right.
You know, which I used to dress like that a little bit. Now I have a mix, but so when I started wearing fitteds and like started getting sneakers, she was like, what? She was kind of like pushing back a little bit. And I remember, but I would still not spend more $100. I would be like 60, 70 bucks, some Chuck Taylors, whatever, Converse, whatever you can get. I had buyer's remorse. But when I saw my boys, they were like 150 pairs.
Yeah, I was like,
yeah. So I pretty much once I opened the floodgates, it opened, and it was like
a door of no return.
My daughter, my oldest daughter, was born in 2013. There was a 6-month span where I probably acquired about 25 pairs at that time. I think the mindset was like, this kid is here, and I've always been deferring what I spend money on because my parents were like, oh, you're gonna need to spend money on this, you need to go to that. And I was like, listen, I've never spent money on myself. This kid's about to come take my money. So it's time for me to spend some money. You know, and
I know you were like, yo, it's my time to shine now.
Kind of thing. And that's kind of where, you know, it is. Although I've calmed down a little bit. After Hajj, I calmed down. What I do now is like I still have them, but I try to like flip. What I try to do is I try to sell stuff and I try to like, you know, use that money to like kind of let the hobby feed itself. Essentially, right?
Got you.
And my wife understands it now because she sees the value. I'll tell her, yeah, you know, I sold this for $700, and I only paid $150 for it. And she's like, okay, she's cool with that now. So it's all good. It's all good on that end. But like, go back to your stance. Like, tell me a little bit about how you kind of formulated your sense of style. Then, like, I guess growing up after post Salafism.
Well, fashion is literally one of the things that helped me rebel.
Okay.
Against Salafism. It was a point where I literally stopped wearing thobes, I stopped wearing kufis, and that was literally part of my rebellion against the hypocrisy of Salafism.
Yeah.
And I had gotten a lot of backdraft because of that. Because, you know, like when you know this just based on your experience via Salafism is that there was a point in time where people would literally declare ta'zeeb against you, heresy against you, if you didn't dress like an Arab or if you didn't dress like a Desi or whatever. People would literally label Hizbi on you if you didn't dress like you were from the Middle East or from the subcontinent.
You had to be almost like Middle Eastern, because even the way you tried the turban, like the Deal Bundys
literally.
You weren't allowed to do that. They'll be like, no, you almost had to have the gutra draped. You would never see a Salafi cat with like the turban with the hat in the middle, even though I would read in like, if you're reading Etiquette of Sikh Knowledge by Sheikh Bakr Abu Zaid,
right?
He would talk about the turban being tied with the hat. And it would be like, it would be a bid'ah to wear the turban without the hat, in a way. You shouldn't do it.
Right,
and you would never see a Salafi cat do it. It would always be straight up like gutra, white or red and white, the shemag, you know, whatever. So they didn't always follow what was in the books.
No, and that's my point. The hypocrisy. The hypocrisy. Yeah.
Right, for sure.
So like I said, I literally used fashion to rebel. That actually ended up being one of my greatest arsenals, one of my greatest weapons, pushing back Salafism.
Okay. And then, like, how did your thing just kind of like start off? I guess, like,
it literally evolved from that.
Okay, so how would you describe your style now? What is that like? I kind of see it's.
That's a good question. I'm very like freelance. I'm very like free spirited when it comes to fashion. Like, I'm not a person who really like follows trends. I'm really not I'm not trend centric, if that makes sense. If I like something, I wear it. If I don't like it, I won't buy it. I'm not really like into trends per se.
Is it something like appeal? So, for example, let's talk about your beard, for instance.
Yeah,
right?
I'm 100% appeal centric. I'm not trend centric.
Okay.
Whatever appeals to me, that's what I like. So,
if someone looks at you, they would see you have a Salafi beard, even though that's not accurate to say. But like, many Muslims, if there's an opinion that having a beard of your length is what's mandatory, right? It's not a Salafi thing either. It's not, they don't have a monopoly on it, right?
Exactly.
Is that your take, or is it more like you like the full beard as a look kind of thing?
Well, to be honest with you, I stopped shaving after I left high school.
Okay.
So I haven't shaven my face since.
So you don't even do it like a lineup or nothing, none of that.
No. I used to actually like shave. Like when I was in high school, I used to shave.
Sure.
So in 2002, that's when I started letting my beard grow. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So it's something that once you left Salafia, it wasn't like, I got to trim my beard up now. You just kind of like, well, it is what it is. Let me just leave it kind of thing. Was it?
Exactly.
It wasn't a conscientious. It was just like, it is what it is. Just let it go, and it's cool, because now it's
because I like, just based on what I know about the beard, I always took the posture that the beard was obligatory.
I feel
so it literally didn't matter whether I was Salafi or not. Like, in other words, like when I left Salafism, I didn't shave my beard or trim it down. I continued to just leave it and let it grow.
Right, because I used to my beard wasn't even that long. I would even trim it when I was, but it was like had more fullness to it, right?
Right.
And I remember it was like, if I ever I remember if I had to go like cross the border, go to Canada or something, I'd trim it up a little bit, and then like the brothers that come back, they're like, "Man, what happened to you, man? Happened to you?"
Those questions.
Questions. And I was like, well, I had to go to my mom. Made me trim it up. It wasn't even this trimmed. It was like a little bit longer. Right. It was longer than what I have now, but they'd be like, well, you didn't have to go to Canada. Like, you don't have to go see family. Like, who said you got to see family? Like, there's no obedience to the creation and disobedience to the creator kind of thing. So, and then I would tell them that I actually didn't have that opinion. I always, because even in that phase, I was like, well, I would look around. So I think part of the reason is like people leave. It's some people who like don't like look at other angles or like do some research, because I was listening to Hamza Yusuf tapes while I was still Salafi. I would go to his like I'd be in the closet about it, but I would like, and I'd be like, you'd research other things. I'm like, certain things do, there's other opinions out there, even though I wouldn't like, flaunt it, so to speak. But yeah,
Gotcha.
but like, because when I first saw you in the Muslims of the World book.
Okay.
Right. And I was like, you look like somebody that you could probably go into. You do some thrifting. Is that accurate? Can I assume that?
Say that again.
You pick up some gear at like thrift stores. Do you do that?
I've shopped at thrift shops before. I like thrift shops.
Yeah, but like I think your vibe. It's like people might want to pigeonhole you as like a hipster look in a way. Whatever. But at the end of the day, I don't like that.
Yeah, I've gotten that before.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means though. I have no idea what that means.
I don't care what it means. It's just like it's like whatever, right?
Right. Okay. Now you mentioned sneakers. Wrapping up the show, I used to ask this question before. I don't ask it as much anymore, but if you had a favorite pair, a favorite model, do you have one off the top of your head?
Just in general, my favorite sneakers are New Balance.
Okay, like not the Dash.
Any New Balance.
Any New Balance.
Basically any New Balance.
Any New Balance. Is New Balance something that you see in New York a lot?
Yeah.
Okay.
They actually have a New Balance store that you can actually pay to get a pair of New Balances like custom made.
Gotcha.
It's like similar to like Nike Town.
All right, man. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. We went over 2 hours. We're gonna have to do a part 2 talking about the whole racism. It's gonna be another 2 hour. Okay. So you sound like you're gonna be another marathon one. Where can people find you if they want to reach out? Engage with you. What's the best way to reach you?
You can find me on Facebook, Gareth Bryant, Twitter, Instagram, The Muslim Model. Mm-hmm. My blog, GarethBryant.wordpress.com.
Okay. Cool. All right. And then if you're in and how's the situation with Corona in New York? Is it popped off a second way? It's like it's hot. It's bad here in Chicago.
The second surge started, but by Allah's mercy, it hasn't really been like that strenuous.
Okay.
But the second surge is definitely upon us. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I'll be honest. I haven't been to Chi-Town in a minute. I know so many people from Chi-Town. Like,
oh yeah.
Like almost exclusively, like through like my experience with like YM Young Muslims, because I used to be part of Young Muslims.
Oh, okay. We probably know a lot of the same people then.
More than likely.
Stay online real quick. I'll stop the recording. Gareth, again, appreciate you coming on. Hopefully,
likewise,
part one of
thank you.
maybe multiple shows. Like definitely part 2. We'll do that soon. Listeners out there, viewers, subscribe. Make sure you hit the subscribe, like. This episode will also be up on the audio apps: Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, and Pocket Cast. And if there's a platform for audio podcasts that I'm not on that you want me to get on, let me know and we can make that happen. Special guest, Gareth Bryant. I'm your host, Mahina Podcaster, signing off for Sultans and Sneakers.